So 2 weeks ago, I showed you my Penguono. So this is a Stephen West pattern, which sort of encourages a scrappy style knitting project. And I started this with my handspun wool. So it started as just basically trying to use up all of the little bits of handspun that I'd kind of made as a beginner spinner. And then it kind of I then got to the point where I needed to spin more wool to keep going with the project. So, yeah, 2 weeks ago, I was in the process of spinning up the yarn. So, I ended up making a 120 grams of Jacob's yarn, 2-ply yarn. I'll insert some clips. I managed to get this wonderful fade going across those sort of four, I guess they were about 30 gram skeins, kind of going dark to light, but kind of streaky. So it'll kind of hopefully be quite sort of blended, like you won't be able to see sort of shock changes or anything. So I made this yarn, and then I was excited. We went away last week, and I was excited to take this project with me, and to have something on bigger needles. I'd been doing a lot of sock knitting, so I'd been on really small needles, and I was excited to get back on something with 5mm needles. So I was up to basically starting the front right panel. So I'd already done the front left, so it was the front right, and I cast on. I sort of picked up stitches sort of here for the side panel, and then you cast on stitches to then fill in this gap here, and then you're knitting across like that. And yeah, I followed my rough notes from last time, cast on the same number of stitches, but after knitting it for about an inch, I realised that the yarn was just too thin. It just, yeah, it just felt like it would be a very gappy, and certainly in comparison to the other side, it wasn't the same at all. And I talked a little bit in my last couple of videos about not being particularly great at taking notes, sort of when I'm anything, whether I'm knitting, spinning, weaving. So it's my own fault basically. I thought I was knitting what is sort of, I guess, my like standard comfortable 2-ply. But yeah, I obviously just went thinner than I did last time I made a batch for this. So I decided to then try it. This was still on holiday last week. I ripped out what that inch that I'd done, and tried it holding the yarn double. I just wanted to see how much difference it was, whether if I just held it double, whether that would then pad it out and sort of bulk it out to the same weight as the other side. But then I realised it was creating a really dense fabric, and also because I was casting on, I used the same number of stitches. The the panel was going to be a good inch or two taller than the other side, which I was like, this isn't going to work. Like, this is going to kind of distort the whole garment then if one side is bigger than the other. So I realised that I wasn't going to be able to solve this whilst we were away. And so I had a couple of days then to just sort of think about what to do. What are my options? The problem was that I didn't want to just respin that whole front section at a heavier weight, because I've only got so much of this fleece. This is fleece, well, I think it's a combination of two fleeces that I acquired over a year ago. And yeah, I'd already been picking out all of the really good dark bits. There's also so much variation in these fleeces, some bits that are kind of very sort of hair-like, and then some bits that are really, really crimpy and really quite short. So I'm also having to sort of try and do a bit of quality control, or at least consistency control, um, so that I'm using the same kind of bits of fleece to then produce the same kind of yarn. Um, so basically, if I wanted to have respun, 120 grams for this front, which I don't actually even know if that's going to be enough, um, but we'll worry about that later. Um, I would have ended up with just predominantly white. I might have been able to have got a bit of brown streaks in it, um, but as you can see, it's it's sort of quite halfy um, so far. Like it's just this front panel. Um, so I thought it would look a bit unbalanced if it was predominantly white on the other side. So what I decided to do instead was to spin up another batch of the Jacobs yarn using only the white stuff, but try and spin really, really fine, and then hold that with the 120 grams I'd already made. And I was hoping that it would give me something that was like in between the original yarn and the yarn I'd just spun held double. Um, so I thought I would take you along on that journey of that being my plan, my theory, and what we actually end up with. So before I just got on with spinning, which is what I would normally do, I thought I would take this opportunity as a forced learning opportunity to actually like try and get my head around sort of how to best measure my yarn. Like what notes should I be taking when I'm spinning in order to I guess get repeatability from spin to spin. So I have membership at the School of Sweet Georgia, which is like an online learning platform that they cover all different types of fibercraft. And they've got a lot of resources about spinning. So I decided to watch the video about how to spin for making a sweater, because I figured it was going to have some good stuff about like, yeah, how to how to measure your yarn, what to think about, and all that stuff. So I found it really interesting. One of the things she talked about was the wraps per inch and how that's sort of quite a common measurement, but actually it's sort of a bit of a flawed one, both in terms of like from one spinner to another, how that they may end up getting a different result. But even you yourself, like, you could wrap the yarn around whatever it is you're using very differently. How much you shouldn't be pulling on the yarn, you shouldn't be like how much do you then compact each wrap to the other one, and depending on if you had like a very squishy yarn or something with a lot of halo, like how do you actually get a consistent measure on the wraps per inch? So her recommendation was kind of, you can use it within yourself in terms of doing like relative comparisons, but it's not the best way. So the one that I think she was encouraging was actually grist, which isn't something which I don't know if that's just an Americanism. I'm not sure I've heard it in the UK. I don't know. So they're measuring it as like yards per pound, but obviously I would rather keep it metric. So for me, that's then meters per 100 gram, which is a measurement, a unit that I recognise from knitting. That's kind of how knitters often describe yarns, is sort of, oh, this is a typical fingering weight yarn. It's got, say 400 meters per 100 grams. So that kind of made sense to me. The only thing that you're missing when you look at that, so that's kind of like a density unit. The only thing you're missing and where maybe the wraps per inch helps is how much space that yarn is taking up, because you can have the same density, but you can either have it very compact and very sleek, or you could have it very lofty and very, airy. So so I wanted to take that into account as well. She also talked about if you had like a control card for whilst you're spinning. So what is it that you should be keeping records of? So sort of keeping your a sample of your singles, a sample of your ply back, and then a sample of your actual properly plied back before and after washing. So I kind of decided to sort of give that a go today as well. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any yarn left of what went into the front, left, front, right. I keep forgetting. The other one, the original front. I did try and like snip off a little tail, but obviously, even with our scales that go down to what is it, 1/10 of a gram, they it didn't register this little tail of yarn. So I wasn't able to work out a grist for it. But then I was thinking that I could look at the yarn that I'd made 2 weeks ago. I can measure the grist of that, which was coming out at what, 220 meters per 100 gram. So I knew what that would be, and I also knew if I held that double, that meant that you basically had double the density. So if you had 220 meters per 100 gram held double, that's actually kind of like saying you've got 110 meters per 100 gram, or at least that's what I'm understanding so far. So that kind of gave me an indication that I wanted almost something that was in between those two. So kind of, don't know, 165 meters per 100 gram if I hold my original yarn with my new yarn. I'm hoping this is making sense. This is somebody learning something for the first time and trying to explain it as they're still understanding it. The other measurement that I realised I had on my side that I could do was measuring the gauge of everything. So I was able to obviously take a gauge of the original front section. So I worked out that that was 16 and a half, 17 stitches per 10 centimeters. I then decided to do gauge swatches for my different scenarios. So I did a gauge swatch holding the new yarn double. So that worked out to be 16 stitches per 10 centimeters. I also then tried it holding it single, and that was 18 stitches per 10 centimeters. So that again kind of confirmed to me that I'm aiming for something in between those. So something that was about 17 stitches per 10 centimeters. So I figured that if I made some yarn as like okay, is it this? Then I could do another gauge swatch afterwards, holding the yarn from 2 weeks ago and the yarn from today together, and see whether that then gave me the gauge to match up with the original front. Before starting to spin, I had to prepare my fibres. So I did that in the usual way, which is where I just use my hand carders to sort of straighten out and detangle the pieces of wool. this then gives me the roll legs that I can then spin from. I found it quite tricky to spin. I was going to say at the beginning, but to be honest, the whole time. I think the wool was feeling particularly sticky. I'm not sure whether it's because I didn't do a great job when I first washed this wool, which was, I mean, over a year ago, so maybe something has even changed in that time. Or whether it's just this particular bit of the fleece, you know, was just really, I don't know, it almost felt like Velcro, like it was just so crimpy. It just didn't really want to, like it was really hard to draft it. I did try, when I did a bit more carding, I tried to make sure that I didn't compact my rolags as much, because I was suspicious that I'd kind of been a bit rough with them when I got them off the carders. So yeah, I tried to keep a bit more air and loftiness in it. You can see from this angle how hard I was finding it to try and keep it consistently thin, because it kind of just felt so sticky. It just, yeah, I just really struggled to not let lumpy bumpy bits through, and where you end up then with these thicker bits sort of getting through and then being spun. I mean, basically they don't really then get spun, they kind of just sort of stay like that. But yeah, this is not my favourite kind of spinning at all. So at this point I thought I would just do a little plyback sample on the wheel, and compare it to the yarn I made 2 weeks ago, and just see how it was looking in terms of that thickness. But yeah, I was quite happy. It sort of seemed like I was heading in the right direction. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the sort of, I guess, best practices that you're supposed to do when you're spinning is to have a control card where you take a sample of your singles and a sample of your plied back yarn straight off the wheel. So I thought, right, yep, come on, let's do it. So I thought it was looking alright. The only thing that I thought was worth experimenting with was trying to add a bit more twist into the singles. This can kind of help as well with this sort of, when you're going this thin, if you get a bit more twist in it, then it's less likely to break on you. So after the initial samples, I then decided to spin a little bit more to actually do a proper plyback. So I think it only worked out, it was about 3 or 4 grams worth of yarn, but it just meant that I could then create a Andean bracelet so that I could ply this little bit of yarn back on itself and see what it actually looks like when you ply it on the wheel, rather than just fold it on in half back on itself. So this is the yarn straight off the wheel. This is before washing. I did a quick measurement of the grist of this yarn at this stage, and it came out at about 340 meters per 100 grams. So it was definitely significantly thinner than my original yarn, which was around, what did we say, about 220 meters per 100 grams. So now it's time to actually do a proper spin. So I spun about 15-16 grams of singles onto each bobbin, so just 2 bobbins. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really enjoy it. I just really find it hard to spin this thin and produce something that I'm happy with. I mean it's really like fleece dependent. I think it's just this bit of this fleece is not it's just way too sticky. I think really this bit of fleece wants to be spun a lot thicker, but you know, this is where we are. This seemed like the best option to try and salvage the spin that I'd already done so far. So here we have it. This was about 30 grams then in the end. It's definitely not got as much twist in it as it was supposed to, but that meant treadling really fast, and yeah, I think I just struggled to keep that spin going. I managed to wash and dry the skein of yarn overnight. I was really keen to get it usable today so that I could take measurements again and see what we've ended up with. So I measured the grist of this yarn before and after washing, and I was quite surprised actually at there was some change. So I lost some weight in the wash, so that probably was just some extra grease and dirt that was still in the fleece. But more surprisingly was the amount of like spring back maybe in the length of the yarn. So yesterday when I measured the skein, I got it at being about, well, it was 77 centimeters double, was the kind of the full length of the hank, I guess. But when I measured that same thing today, it was 67 centimeters times 2. So it's like sprung back loads. I knew my yarns had done that a little bit in the past, but I think it's just the amount of crimp in this yarn, and when you're sort of, you know, spinning it not particularly tight and it's a 2-ply, I think it does just mean that the fibres, when they're washed, do just kind of want to contract again. So I just found that really interesting. But yeah, my numbers therefore went from 370 meters per 100 grams to 345 meters per 100 grams. So I've just finished my latest swatch. So this is holding the original yarn with the new thinner yarn that I've just made. And I've just, if I, rather than count stitches, because this is all the same width, the same number of stitches, I can measure the first section where it was held double and say that that was about 13.5 centimetres. We then went down to as low as 12 centimetres when it was just being held single. And then in my new section, I'm back to 13.5. So maybe even as much as 14 in places. Okay, I'm going to try and explain the maths that I've just done. So obviously it would have been nice if the yarn that I made had meant that the gauge of the two held together was the same gauge as what I've already got, but that's not what's happened. But I do like the feel of the fabric. So when I compare, effectively the option 1, 2 and 3, when I compare them against what I've already made, that last one, with holding the new and the old yarn together, is my favourite. So what I've done is I've measured the sort of the gauge of this front panel, and the gauge of this swatch. And what I've said then is, if originally here, I think I said cast on 38 stitches. This is the armhole section here. So if this bit here was cast on 38 stitches and that measures 23 centimetres, then I'm basically going, okay, but if this is, this gauge, which was like 15.5 stitches and 10 centimetres, that means cast on 35 stitches rather than the 38. So that just means that this panel here won't be as, should then be the same height. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do the same for this picking up against this side panel section, but I think I should, because otherwise I'm going to find that panel that joins here is going to just be bigger, and that's going to, it's going to sit more like that, but I want it to sit the same. So I've done the same kind of maths, and so rather than picking up 50 stitches here, I think I need to pick up 46 stitches, and then that should give me the same overall height of the front panel as what we've already got. I then thought, what's going to happen? I then thought, what does that mean for the decreases along the front? So hopefully you can kind of see, we decrease here, but I think I'm just going to keep to the same rate as decreases as in the pattern. It's not a huge difference, so I'm not too fussed if this is pitched slightly differently. This cardigan, you then actually add at least a collar here, but I may also add to this sort of front section here. So there's more I can do at that point, so I'm not too worried about that. So where does that leave us? So I still don't have exactly the right yarn or yarn combo to perfectly match the front side, the other front side of the cardigan. But as I've just explained, hopefully explained all right, I think there's a way that I can just play around with the number of stitches that I pick up and cast on for that front section, so that I should get something that's at least the right dimensions. Fingers crossed. But maybe more importantly, I feel like this has been a really good lesson for me in terms of like realizing that I just need to be a bit more intentional with my spinning. I need to take better notes. I need to actually measure what I'm making and have control cards so that if I get into this scenario again, which is very likely to happen, and I need to spin up something to match something I've already made, um, I've given myself the best chance basically to be able to replicate that yarn. So I hope that you may have found that video helpful or at least just interesting. And please, I welcome any tips or advice about how you go about, I guess, sort of the more kind of note taking side of spinning. What is the secret to actually keeping on top of your notes, and having, I guess, references? So yeah, any advice, very much welcome. And yeah, I'm quite excited now. I can actually go and work on my cardigan. So I'll see you next time. Bye.